Your Excellencies, the Administrator of the United Nations Development Programme, Mr. Achim Steiner, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I declare open the 21st session of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation. Excellencies, distinguished guests, I am pleased to welcome all of you, distinguished delegates, to this 21st session of the High-Level Committee. It is the first in-person session held after the lockdowns and other disruptions due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We meet here at a time when developing countries need multilateral solutions to recover and build forward better from the pandemic while addressing the effects of climate change and other ongoing crises, including conflicts. Excellencies, the term Global South is often used to group together everything that is not a traditional industrialized country. But the Global South is, as you will appreciate, much more diverse in capacity and economic activity than the label implies. Its emerging markets offer numerous opportunities for economic growth, investment, and cultural contribution. As a renowned research and development policy specialist observed, the main difference that is put forth is that cooperation is horizontal and that what Global South countries do is different and comes from a different background than traditional donors. Today, however, our greatest challenge is that we cannot allow to rest South-South development cooperation as a catchphrase that generates more public support than its results warrant. The search for such solutions amid a confluence of crisis makes it all the more important and timely, I say, to dedicate these 4 days to explore pathways to greater collective action in the pursuit of sustainable development and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals through the contributions of South-South and triangular cooperation. The subject of our thematic discussion during this session is accelerating the recovery from the coronavirus disease pandemic and the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development through the South-South and triangular cooperation. We shall discuss that topic tomorrow afternoon. Distinguished delegates, when we look at South-South cooperation in its present setting, we see a resurgence of this development modality. We see it moving once again to play a principal role in global politics and economics, and it presents to us a renewed hope, I say, in what it promised to do, and that is to transform the world order. It therefore must be appreciated that it is almost 68 years since the Bandung Conference of 1955, which set the foundation for South-South cooperation to achieve global status, and that it was an initiative intended to mitigate the domination of the economic and political systems of the developed North. Since then, South-South cooperation has had a rather uneven progression and even setbacks. Solidarity, Excellencies, amongst the developing countries began to emerge. This emergence brought about serious focus on the relationship between colony and metropole, the seat of political, cultural, and economic power that had the effect of holding back countries of the Global South. The spirit of this resurgence expressed the essential feature of non-interference and non-alignment. The growth of the non-aligned movement over time contributed to greater solidarity to challenge global inequality and encourage a third world economic order that diluted their dependence on the global North. Excellencies, Bandung and Nam gave the political impetus to the emergent South-South cooperation, while the G77 the creation of the member state countries present at the founding of UNCTAD called for a new international economic order to be established with the objective of addressing the structural inequities in trade, particularly the exports and imports of developing countries, with an emphasis on sovereignty. Excellencies, this new dimension found favor in the context of the failure of the emerging post-war international global environment to engage with effects of colonialism and provide accommodation for the new states to adopt development policies that were best suited for them. Initiatives to build partnerships between countries of the South in this quest for a new international order, which translated into the Buenos Aires Action Plan for promoting and implementing technical cooperation among developing countries, adopted in 1978, signed by 138 countries, remains a cornerstone of technical cooperation among developing countries, cooperation for almost 45 years on. Excellencies, we are presently in a world that is moving South-South cooperation, as I said before, to the center stage of world politics. The economic and diplomatic achievements of the established countries of the global South to the increasing potentialities of the South-South cooperation. The global economic landscape has also gone through an economic transformation by the global shift that we see in production and manufacturing from the global North to the global South. It is significant to note that the potential of renewed South-South cooperation is also the possibility for the relaxation of restrictions putting in place during colonial times. We must also, however, be conscious of the fact that in the context of the polycrisis, climate change and consequent ecological changes transform the whole concept of development in the global South, and the trajectory of South-South cooperation, therefore, has changed. We are struggling to manage the tensions between capital expansion, market competition, legal and political order, and the rights and welfare of our people and the environment. Excellencies, the interference of humanity upon the web of life, as was observed just a few days ago in this very assembly at the Conference on Science, and its impact by the South African medical doctor, academic, and anti-apartheid activist, Dr. Mamphela Rafael, co-president of the Club of Rome, the chair of the Tutu IP Trust, who said, she said, compels us to engage in deep philosophical reflection on the meaning of development and the search for alternative ways of life and human relations with nature. It is against this backdrop that we embark today on these very meaningful ways ahead of us. The time is opportune, Excellencies. May I leave you with an encouraging observation by our Secretary General when he said, quote, South-South and triangular cooperation must have a central place in our preparations for a strong recovery. We will need the full contributions and cooperation of the global South to build more resilient economies and societies and implement the sustainable development goals. Let us therefore apply our best efforts. Excellencies, the Bureau you elected and I count on your full cooperation to ensure a smooth, effective, and successful session in our common quest to achieving the 2030 agenda. I thank you. Excellencies, it is now my privilege and great pleasure to invite the Administrator of the UNDP, Mr. Eichem Steiner, to make a statement. Allow me to remind delegates that the Administrator is in fact the convener of this high-level committee on behalf of the United Nations Secretary General. In that context, his presence here this morning is of much importance, and I'm very pleased to give him the floor. The floor is yours, Director.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to join the President to welcome you to the 21st session of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation. Let me extend my congratulations to His Excellency Peter Mohan Maitri Piris, the permanent representative of Sri Lanka, on his election as President, and other Bureau members from Italy, Barbados, the Russian Federation, and Burundi, elected to serve on the Bureau of the 21st session of the High-Level Committee. We look forward to working closely with you during the session. Please allow me to also express my sincere gratitude to Her Excellency Maria del Carmen Squef, the permanent representative of Argentina, for her leadership of the High-Level Committee over the past 2 years. A special thanks also go to Qatar, Lithuania, Portugal, and Nigeria for their committed work as part of the Bureau of the 20th session of the committee. Let me also take this opportunity to warmly welcome our new Director of the United Nations Office of South-South Cooperation, Ms. Dima Al-Khatib, to my left, who assumed her role on 1st of March 2023, although many of you might be forgiven for thinking it was 2022 because she has been so active in these first few months that I am truly delighted to have you join us. Thank you, Dima. Mr. President, as you already alluded to, we are joining here at a time of many cascading global crises and shifts. It includes the cost of living crisis that has tipped millions of people into poverty, the violent conflicts in many parts of the world, and to an intensifying climate emergency. The latest data makes for sobering reading. Of the roughly 140 Sustainable Development Goal targets with data, only 12% are currently on track. For instance, at the current rate of progress, 575 million people will still be living in extreme poverty by the end of this decade, not what we would have wished for and had planned for when we met in the General Assembly Hall in 2015 to adopt the 2030 Agenda. This era of, as it has come to be known, polycrisis has also severely disrupted South-South and triangular cooperation in key areas such as trade and investment, infrastructure, and remittances. Yet it has also prompted a range of new opportunities that includes supporting developing countries to manufacture and deploy COVID-19 vaccines, benefiting hundreds of millions of people. We have seen multiple new institutional arrangements. For instance, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, comprised of 21 economies, is advancing a cutting-edge biocircular green economy model. As outlined in our strategic plan in UNDP, South-South and triangular cooperation is also firmly embedded in UNDP's support. Indeed, in many respects, today's work of UNDP is derived precisely from the partnerships that we are undertaking across the Global South, as you referred to it earlier on, Mr. President. To take just one example, consider our regional COVID-19 recovery project supported by China, which provides for the transfer of vital health technologies to Cambodia, Laos PDR, Myanmar, Nepal, and the Philippines. There have been a remarkable 14 million direct and indirect beneficiaries. Building on this momentum, I would like to share with you 3 potential key streams of change. First, there is the pressing need, often already articulated by our Secretary General, for global efforts to address the debt and liquidity crisis at a time when some 25 developing economy governments are spending $1 in every $5 they collect simply to service their debt. This limiting their ability to invest in the future, everything from tackling poverty to investing in the green energy transition or indeed an economic recovery. The UN Secretary-General has outlined a clear way to tackle this turmoil via his SDG stimulus plan. As part of these efforts, the United Nations is supporting countries to unlock new finances. Consider, for instance, the Integrated National Financing Frameworks and Open Budget for Sustainable Development in Africa initiative. It has brought 52 countries in Africa together to share their expertise in key areas, including climate finance, tax reforms, and SDG budgeting. As a result, 20 countries have now endorsed action plans on integrated national financing frameworks, which, when implemented fully, are a proven way to drive billions of dollars towards the SDGs and recovery. Second, we must heed the lessons of the pandemic and build upon developing countries' many new forms of cooperation. That includes sharing knowledge in key areas like digital public infrastructure or DPI. For instance, that will allow countries to rapidly roll out better, more effective social protection programs and other supports that when the next crisis hits. Even more importantly, this digital public infrastructure represents, if you want, the arteries that will allow new services to flow to communities, everything from e-health to e-government services. Third, developing countries need more support to advance specific digital and technology-driven solutions that can also help them make the SDG leapfrogs, or as the Secretary General has referred to it, to rescue the SDGs in every national context. For instance, our Accelerator Labs network is supporting grassroots innovators in 115 countries today to surface, scale up, and share innovative solutions emerging from within the countries we work with. There are many solutions ready to be shared even more widely, everything from using artificial intelligence to tackling climate change to supporting farmers to increase their agricultural production. Indeed, technology transfer in key areas like renewable energies like solar will be key. This aim is also complemented by the South-South Galaxy platform, which hosts a range of solutions that can be adapted immediately and was developed by the Office for South-South Cooperation. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, to implement the UN system-wide strategy on South-South and triangular cooperation, the UN Office for South-South Cooperation has produced a clear set of guidelines. They will enable the UN system to support member states to better leverage the almost limitless potential of this type of cooperation, helping to generate new answers to acute development challenges and, Mr. President, as you alluded to in your remarks, in a new era, also defining South-South cooperation. Indeed, the discussions this week will be vital to further define the future direction of the UN system's support in this critical area. Finally, let me also say that UNDP is proud to host the UN Office on South-South Cooperation as a global fulcrum for this tried and trusted form of cooperation since 1974. At this moment of immense uncertainty, I would like to encourage partners to contribute to the UN Fund for South-South Cooperation. That is part of vital efforts to further disseminate and adapt practical solutions that are already improving the daily lives of communities and advancing the SDGs across the globe. Perhaps even more importantly, it shows how solidarity is winning over separation. Thank you to all those who have supported this work, and once again let me say what an honor it is to join you here today and to celebrate both the aspiration, the success, but also a realistic view of the challenges that lie ahead of us. Thank you.
I thank the Administrator for his most comprehensive and insightful statement. His words contribute to spur our deliberations at this session of the High-Level Committee. We look forward to working closely with Mr. Steiner and his staff at the UNDP during this session and in the 2 years ahead. Thank you very much for those very insightful words. Excellencies, the committee will now begin its general debate on the substantive items of its agenda outlined in document SSC/21/L3/Rev1, namely item 2, which sets out the review of progress made in implementing the Buenos Aires Plan of Action for promoting and implementing technical cooperation amongst developing countries, the New Directions Strategy for South-South Cooperation, the Nairobi Outcome Document of the High-Level United Nations Conference on South-South Cooperation, and the Outcome Document of the Second High-Level United Nations Conference on South-South Cooperation, BAPA +40. And then we get on to item 3, to a consideration of the report of the Secretary General of the progress made in the implementation of Decision 20/1 of the High-Level Committee. And then on to item 4, the consideration of the report of our Administrator of the United Nations Development Programme to the 21st session of the High-Level Committee. Now, in addition to item 2, this will include updates on the support provided by the United Nations Development Programme and the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation to interregional initiatives and the progress that they made in the promotion and facilitation of South-South and triangular cooperation. Excellencies, the committee has before it documents SSC 21/1 and SSC/21/2, which constitutes the relevant documentation for these items on the agenda for this session. I might also remind the delegations that have not already done so to kindly inscribe their names on the list of speakers before 6 p.m. today to enable us to organize our work in an efficient manner. As we agreed at the organizational meeting, statements will be limited to 8 minutes for representatives of groups of member states, 5 minutes for representatives of individual member states, and 3 minutes for other participants. Excellencies, to begin the general discussion, I would like to give the floor first to our Director, Madam Dima Al-Khatib of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation, to introduce the reports relating to items 2, 3, and 4 of the agenda. Mrs. Al-Khatib assumed leadership, as we were told just now, of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation on the 1st of March 23. And in your behalf, I wish to convey our collective congratulations while welcoming her to make her maiden address to this committee. The floor is yours, Director.
Thank you very much, Excellencies. Mr. President, I feel greatly honored to address this 21st session of the High-Level Committee for South-South Cooperation. And I would like to join the UNDP Administrator in congratulating you and your Bureau for steering the preparations and convening of the 21st session. The United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation stands ready to continue to work closely with you throughout your leadership term for this committee. It is my pleasure to introduce the reports of the UNDP Administrator and the United Nations Secretary General that have been submitted for the committee's consideration. Both reports give an illustrative picture of the efforts during the reporting period from June 2021 to March 2023 to enhance the progress in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals through South-South and Triangular Cooperation. The first report, SSC/21/1 for consideration under Agenda Item 2 and 4, is entitled Review of Progress Made in Implementing the Buenos Aires Plan of Action for Promoting and Implementing Technical Cooperation Among Developing Countries, the New Directions, Strategy for South-South Cooperation, the Nairobi Outcome Document of the High-Level United Nations Conference on South-South Cooperation, and the Buenos Aires Outcome Document for the second High-Level United Nations Conference on South-South Cooperation. The report highlights the activities of developing and developed countries, international organizations, the private sector, and civil society entities relating to the objectives set out in the above-mentioned frameworks. The UNDP Administrator observes in his report that during the reporting period, South-South cooperation evolved despite the context of global crisis resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and ongoing conflicts around the world. The report is also a reason to be optimistic as it highlights numerous South-South cooperation initiatives that developing countries continue to pursue towards the attainment of the SDGs and other development objectives. Allow me to present a synopsis of the report content, Mr. President, Excellencies. Among the key trends highlighted in the reports, developing countries and their partners continued to foster regional integration, self-reliance, capacity development, and international cooperation, responding to the needs of the least developed countries and landlocked developing countries and the interests of the small island developing states. The voice of the Global South was further amplified during the reporting period through the assumption of leadership of the Group of 20 by Indonesia and then India, and the successful hosting of the Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change by Egypt. We saw across regions new institutional mechanisms to manage South-South cooperation, including methodologies to measure the impact of South-South programs. Another notable trend were reinvigorated engagements in triangular cooperation by developed countries through the provision of financial resources and technical expertise. Furthermore, the growing number of South-South partnerships involving civil society, think tanks, the private sector, and academia became more instrumental in scaling up the implementation of the 2030 Agenda through South-South and Triangle cooperation. And finally, there was a surge in the formation of interregional South-South cooperation alliances in recent years that have benefited from significant support from UNDP and the UN Office for South-South Cooperation. Through the UN Fund for South-South Cooperation, numerous interregional activities were supported jointly with UN entities and member states. This also includes organization of interregional policy dialogues to advance South-South and Triangle cooperation. The Administrator's report also highlights measures taken to strengthen the role and impact of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperations. These endeavors relied primarily on the resources of UNDP, which funded the formulation and now the implementation of the UN Office for South-South Cooperation current strategic framework. Among the conclusions and the recommendations is the need to leverage creative cooperation and to focus more on strategic recovery measures, including bigger investments in healthcare and education for all, digital transformation, sustainable technologies, humanitarian assistance, governance and monetary and financial systems. The need for more nuanced South-South exchanges among governments, private sector and other relevant actors to bolster the capacity of the South to produce affordable goods and services in a sustainable manner. The need for national and regional authorities to strengthen interregional South-South initiatives through pooled human and financial resources. Equally needed are peer-to-peer dialogues among Southern leaders and policies on effective governance to transform the countries of the Global South into safer, more prosperous places to live and work. And more support is needed from northern countries or partners for triangular cooperation to strengthen the financial, scientific, and technological capacities of developing countries. Excellencies, the second document before you, SSC/21/2 for consideration under Agenda Item 3, is the report of the United Nations Secretary General on measures taken by the United Nations organizations to implement Decision 20/1 of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation through support for South-South and Triangle cooperation to bolster human solidarity and accelerate implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals in the Global South and beyond. In line with the Decision 20/1 of the Committee encouraging developments over the past 2 years, it includes the following. United Nations entities have further institutionalized South-South and Triangle cooperation in their policies, plans, and strategies at all levels. United Nations programmatic support for member states' policy dialogues, capacity development, advocacy, and other South-South cooperation initiatives has become more systematic. There is an increasing United Nations support in the establishment and strengthening of national and regional institutions for the management of South-South and Triangle cooperation. The United Nations is also facilitating access of developing countries to digital and other enabling technologies. The United Nations organizations are engaging with the Global South in the formulation of policies and programs to prevent the spread of COVID-19, and the United Nations entities continue to play a catalytic role in attracting a wide range of partners to financially support South-South and Triangular cooperation initiatives. The report also highlights the role of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation in facilitating and promoting South-South and Triangle cooperation at the global level and across the United Nations system. The Office has supported South-South Triangular cooperation policy making and provided intergovernmental support by facilitating dialogues among member states and support the Second Committee of the General Assembly, as well as serving as the Secretariat to the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation. The Office continued to strengthen the United Nations system-wide coordination on South-South and Triangle cooperation through the convening of the United Nations Interagency Mechanism for South-South and Triangle cooperation. It has also developed tools that will enhance the efforts of member states in planning and managing South-South and Triangle cooperation. The Office has collaborated with the Interagency Mechanism, the Development Cooperation Office, the United Nations Development for Economic and Social Affairs and regional commissions, as well as some United Nations resident coordinators in developing the guidelines to implement the UN system-wide strategy on South-South and Triangle cooperation at country and regional levels. These guidelines will be released later this year. The Office also, in collaboration with member states, UN entities, and partners, is also developing a handbook to support the integration of South-South and Triangle cooperation perspectives into the voluntary national reviews of the SDGs progress. We will be holding a dedicated side event for that on the sidelines of the high-level political forum. The office also continues to map, document, and disseminate good practices in South-South and Triangular cooperation to enable South-South knowledge exchange, capacity building, and technology development and transfer. Finally, UNOSCE has continued to serve as the fund manager of the United Nations Fund for South-South Cooperation, the Perez Guerrero Trust Fund for South-South Cooperation, the India, Brazil, and South Africa Facility for Poverty and Hunger Alleviation, the India-UN Development Partnership Fund, reaching 85 countries, including 27 LDCs, 28 SIDS, and 10 LLDCs during the reporting period. To improve the United Nations system-wide coherence and the contribution of South-South and Triangle cooperation to the attainment of the 2030 Agenda, conclusions and recommendations of the report of the UN Secretary-General include the following. UN entities should expand efforts to institutionalize and operationalize South-South and Triangle cooperation mechanisms, especially at the country level. The United Nations Development System should continue to strengthen the capacities of southern countries when requested that will enable them to institutionalize South-South cooperation and attract resources. United Nations entities should leverage the benefit of South-South and Triangle cooperation alongside more traditional forms of development cooperation, notably in improved alignment to address local conditions based on cross-country and or cross-regional initiatives. More concerted efforts are required to involve the private sector, civil society organizations, and academia from the Global South in the cross-border fertilization of ideas and approaches, knowledge sharing, and skills transfers, including the pooling of human and financial resources. And attention is needed to identify the kinds of funding and institutional support required to confront the development challenges at the individual country level that can best be supported by government and private sectors through South-South and Triangle cooperation. Mr. President, we would like to seize this opportunity to thank UNDP for continuing to host and ensure the efficient functioning of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation. This has been a key enabler for the UN Office for South-South Cooperation to implement its mandates and serve its constituency. In conclusion, permit me to express my gratitude to all the heads of United Nations entities who have joined the United Nations Interagency Mechanism for South-South and Triangle Cooperation as the Office continues to implement its strategic framework for the years 2021-2025. We look forward to your guidance on how we can spur support to Member States, South-South and Triangle cooperation efforts to meet the SDGs during the current decade of action. I thank you.
I thank the Director Dima Al-Khatib for her informative statement and wish her success in spearheading the mandate of the office in promoting and facilitating South-South and Triangular cooperation for development on a global and United Nations system-wide basis. We wish you every success.
Thank you.
Excellencies, I now have the privilege of inviting the Honorable Mrs. Ana Teresita Gonzalez Fraga, First Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Foreign Trade, and I'm sorry, yes, that's right now,
Minister of Foreign Trade and
Investment of Cuba, who wishes to make a statement on behalf of the Group of 77 and China.
Sí, muy buenos días.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, Excellencies and colleagues, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Group of 77 and China. At the outset, I would like to congratulate you, Mr. President, as well as the other members of the Bureau, for your election to lead this high-level committee. The Group of 77 and China looks forward to working closely, actively, and constructively with you and members of your Bureau. The group reaffirms its view of South-South cooperation as a manifestation of solidarity among peoples and countries of the South that contributes to their national well-being, their national and collective self-reliance, and the attainment of internationally agreed development goals, including the Sustainable Development Goals. As mentioned in the Nairobi Outcome Document and reiterated in the BAPA Plus 40 Outcome Document, South-South cooperation and its agenda have to be set by countries of the South and should continue to be guided by the principles in respect for national sovereignty, national ownership and independence, equality, non-conditionality, non-interference in domestic affairs, and mutual benefit. At the same time, we reiterate that South-South cooperation is not a substitute, but rather a complement to North-South cooperation. Strengthening and expanding South-South cooperation among developing countries shall not reduce the commitment of developed countries and their long-standing pledges in terms of the volume and quality of their official development assistance. Mr. President, we are meeting at a time of unprecedented global crises, 8 years after the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Decades of development gains have been undermined and, in some cases, reversed. International cooperation and global solidarity have never been more necessary than now to face the current challenges and to bring the developing countries back on track to achieve the 2030 Agenda and its SDGs. The discussions of the High-Level Committee during this week will be an opportunity not only to take stock of the progress made in the implementation of the BAPA Plus 40 outcome document, but also an opportunity to highlight the importance of South-South and triangular cooperation in the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, and to raise the awareness of the international community on its continued relevance. We reiterate our strong support to the mandate of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation. The group is pleased that the office, in its strategic framework 2022-25, will continue to support the efforts of developing countries in implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in the decade of action in accordance with their needs and priorities. We further express our appreciation to the UN Office of South-South Cooperation as the articulator for South-South cooperation in the UN system and its leadership for being an all-around and responsive partner of the group and for playing a critical role in advancing the construction of a much-needed multilateral South-South support architecture. The group also appreciates the countries of the South who have stepped up their cooperation with the office, which has also enhanced its role and impact by upscaling it in terms of financial, human, and budgetary resources for the achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Mr. President, the group would like to recall the importance of triangular cooperation, which is aimed at facilitating, supporting, and enhancing South-South initiatives through the provision of inter alia, funding, capacity building, technology transfer, as well as other forms of support at the request of developing countries, in line with the principles of South-South cooperation. And this must be led by the countries of the South. In addition, we also underline the need to strengthen South-South and triangular cooperation on access to science, technology, and innovation by creating synergies, developing expertise, and boosting resources in different regions and institutions. And in this regard, we welcome the convening of the Havana Summit on Science, Technology, and Innovation to be held on the 15th and 16th of September as an effort to enhance cooperation in this field. The group further recognizes that unilateral sanctions against developing countries constitutes a major impediment to economic and social development and seriously hinders dialogue and understanding among countries. Such actions not only undermine the principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and international law, but also severely threaten the freedom of trade and investment. These actions constitute major obstacles to South-South and triangular cooperation. Mr. President, the group is of the view that in our collective efforts to implement and achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development as well as other commitments, the growing importance of South-South and triangular cooperation must be recognized. But at the same time, we emphasize that its role is a complement and not a substitute of North-South cooperation. Finally, we are confident that under your leadership, the 21st session of the High-Level Committee will be a success, and we hope that the views and concerns of the G77 and China will be duly incorporated in its deliberations. Thank you.
I thank Deputy Minister González-Fraga for her very important statement, and your presence, ma'am, this morning with us is a source of encouragement. Thank you. I now have the pleasure of inviting Sylvain Gambert from the European Union delegation to the United Nations to make a statement on behalf of the European Union. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, I have the honor of delivering this statement on behalf of the European Union and its 27 member states. The European Union welcomed this very timely discussion, and we reiterate our commitment to advancing South-South cooperation as a positive driver for the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. To further ensure synergies, it is crucial that South-South cooperation aligns with the UN Sustainable Development Cooperation frameworks and complements North-South and triangular cooperation. We strongly emphasize the need for these various approaches to work together harmoniously, leveraging each other's strength. South-South cooperation proves particularly useful in accelerating the adoption and implementation of best practices, especially at the regional level. By scaling up what works in specific contexts, we can achieve progress towards eradication of poverty, reaching the SDGs, and recovering faster and better from the COVID-19 pandemic. Thus, it is of great importance that South-South cooperation remains fully aligned with the 2030 Agenda, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, as well as global commitments such as the Paris Agreement or the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. In this endeavor, we acknowledge the significant role of triangular cooperation, a model that promotes collaboration among developed countries, developing countries, and international organizations. In our commitment to South-South and triangular cooperation, the EU recognizes the critical role of capacity building and knowledge transfer in our partnerships. The EU stands ready to continue supporting and enhancing this successful approach. We must also acknowledge the crucial role played by all stakeholders in this process. Civil society organizations, private sector, academia, and international institutions all have a part to play. Their active engagement, knowledge sharing, and innovative approaches are essential to realize the full potential of South-South and triangular cooperation. In this sense, if you allow me to share two concrete examples in which the EU is directly involved. First, the EU, together with the Thailand International Cooperation Agency and the UN Resident Coordinator in Thailand, launched 3 flagship initiatives to accelerate the shift to organic agriculture, as well as to improve sexual and reproductive healthcare services, including capacity development in midwifery and supporting health officials in engaging in global health forums. Our second example is the flagship program Adelante 2, implemented by the EU in collaboration with partner countries and international organizations, that aims to facilitate knowledge exchange and capacity building to address development challenges in Latin America and in the Caribbean. In 2022, 14 triangular partnerships were implemented under that program, each tied to one or several of the SDGs. including on sustainable agriculture in Mexico and Argentina, and on green micro-entrepreneurship in Peru and Costa Rica. Mr. President, we hope that these examples can serve as an inspiration for further collaboration towards a sustainable and inclusive future for all. I thank you.
I thank Mr. Sylvain Gambert for his very important statement, and may I thank the EU for the support which is visibly, manifestly seen to the South-South Cooperation Initiative. Excellencies, before calling on the next speaker on my list, I wish to remind delegations of the need to make our debate interactive and lively. No doubt we have not got into the heavy hours of the morning yet, but be that as it may, let's try and make it lively so that we have outcomes at the end of the day, quite apart from making our statements. Now, to that end, the director of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation and some of us may ask for the floor to respond as appropriate to the observations and suggestions made by delegations during the debate. Thereafter, I will invite comments from the floor, either on the director's response or on the issues raised by various delegations. Now, the next item on the agenda is that I call upon the speakers on my list. And may I have the Bahamas? Yes. May I have the honor of calling upon the distinguished representative of the Bahamas for her intervention. The floor is yours.
Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the 14 member states of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM. CARICOM aligns itself with the statement delivered by the distinguished representative of the Republic of Cuba on behalf of the Group of 77 in China. We extend congratulations to you, Mr. President, and the other members of the Bureau on your election to lead this high-level committee. You have the support of CARICOM in the work that lies ahead, and we look forward to actively working closely and constructively with the Bureau. As the international community continues to face cascading global crises, countries are experiencing regression relative to achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. According to statistics released by the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, the projected growth for the Caribbean in 2023 is 9.1%. Therefore, South-South cooperation and indeed triangular cooperation can and must be the focus of our national, regional, and international policies if we are to make significant progress towards the full realization of the SDGs by the end of this decade. However, they are not to replace North-South cooperation. Mr. President, taking stock of the progress made in the implementation of the BAPA plus 40 outcome document will be critical during HLC discussions this week. The forum will also provide an opportunity to highlight the importance of South-South triangular cooperation in the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic and ongoing crises, and to raise awareness regarding its continued relevance. Additionally, this will engender channels for countries of the Global South to create spaces to share effective and proactive policy measures in containing the spread of COVID-19 and in mitigating against its social and economic fallout. We thank the United Nations Development System, as well as the UN Office for South-South Cooperation and ECLAC for their continued support to South-South and triangular cooperation in the region, especially in increasing awareness and building networks across the UN system and in the region. For example, the very first session of the Regional Conference on South-South Cooperation in Latin America and the Caribbean is currently underway at the ECLAC headquarters in Santiago, Chile. Mr. President, it is crucial to address the reality which small island developing states, SIDS, or middle-income countries, such as those in CARICOM, face, as we are negatively impacted by the global crises with limited access to capital markets. Hence, the proposals such as those contained in the Bridgetown Initiative and the SDG stimulus are supported by CARICOM. If enacted, they will help to unlock much-needed access to finance and, importantly, lead the way towards much-needed reform of the international financial architecture. In closing, CARICOM is confident that under your leadership The 21st session of the High-Level Committee will be a success, and we hope that the views and concerns of CARICOM will be duly incorporated in its deliberations. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Bahamas for delivering the statement on behalf of the CARICOM. May I now proceed to give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nepal, who will deliver on the statement on behalf of the LDCs. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Mr. Administrator of the UNDP, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Allow me to congratulate you, Mr. President, for your election to preside the 21st session of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation. I'm delighted to deliver these remarks on behalf of the least developed countries. I also align my statement with the statement of the G77 in China delivered by Cuba. At first, I thank the Secretary General and Administrator of the UNDP for their substantive report, which have just been presented by the Director of the South-South Cooperation. The reports outline the progress made, challenges encountered, and the way forward for South-South cooperation, especially in the implementation of Buenos Aires Plan of Action, the Nairobi Outcome Document, and the Buenos Aires Outcome Document of the second high-level UN Conference on South-South Cooperation. In recent years, the world has been facing unprecedented challenges posed by COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and conflicts. There is need for a stronger international cooperation, including South-South cooperation, to fight the ramifications of these multiple crises. We've witnessed that these crises have inspired robust collaboration among the countries of the South in order to support the recovery from the pandemic and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. For instance, we saw important progress in sectors of health, food security and education, trade and investment, regional integration and infrastructure development, finance, environment, and digitalization, industrialization, and the use of science and technology for development among countries of the Global South. Developed countries have also supported the triangular cooperation through a wide range of initiatives focusing on COVID-19 recovery, climate change, and food security. The United Nations entities have also supported the South-South and Triangular Initiative through various projects and programs. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, though some countries of the South have been showing commendable economic performance, the progress among them is uneven. The LDCs, with some modest progress in socioeconomic fields, remain at the bottom of the development ladder. The LDCs account for 13% of the world population, but only about 1.3% of global GDP and less than 1% of global trade and FDI. They host about 40% of the world poor. Many are suffering from the conflict emerging from one. They are also facing the major brunt of the ongoing global challenges and crises. Therefore, the LDCs need more than ever accelerated support from the countries of the South. And let me highlight some areas where we needed a scale of support from the countries of the South along with our development partners. First, a number of developing countries have provided DFQF market access to LDCs. While welcoming such support, we request other developing countries that are in position to do so to extend DFQF market access for all products from all LDCs. Regional, sub-regional, and inter-regional trade agreements should also provide real, effective, and additional market access for exports from LDCs. Second, many developing countries are also supporting LDCs through their financial support, including the emergency humanitarian assistance. While welcoming such support, we also request developing countries to increase participation in innovative sources of funding mechanisms, such as blended financing. Third, development partners, including Southern partners, can support the adoption of an investment promotion regime for LDCs as agreed in Doha Program of Actions to promote investment in infrastructure and productive capacity building in LDCs. Many developing countries have set up sovereign funds available for investment abroad. Some portion of these funds could be invested in LDCs. Fourth, the countries of South are a tremendous source of tested technological solutions to development challenges faced by the LDCs. They can offer new sources of ideas, models, and practice for LDCs. There are a number of successful experiences in applying science and technology and technical know-how in the development processes of developing countries. These should be shared with LDCs. The countries of South can also support the Technology Bank for LDCs. Here, we must mention the generous and continued contribution of Turkey for hosting the Technology Bank since 2018. Fifth, migration and remittances provided a major support to the economy in LDCs. Considering that most migrants live and work in countries of the Global South, South-South dialogues and policies to better coordinate and management and regulations of migration are essential to implementing the Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration. Equally needed are peer-to-peer dialogues among Southern leaders and policies on effective governance to transform the countries of the Global South into safer, more prosperous places to live and work. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the Doha Program of Actions for LDCs adopted the 5th UN Conference on LDCs calls upon the countries of the Global South to further strengthen their support to least developed countries in all these areas in a predictable manner along the lines of Buenos Aires Outcome document of the second high-level United Nations Conference on South-South Cooperation. The DPOA calls for support from the countries of the South, especially in the areas of technical assistance, sharing of best practices in terms of their development, especially in areas of productive capacity building, infrastructure, energy, science and technology, trade and investment, and transit transport cooperation. We thank the government of Qatar, an important partner of the Global South, for being the generous host of LDC 5 conference. Many other countries of the South have also made important announcements in Doha to support the implementation of the next Doha Program of Action. This is truly encouraging. We also encourage the other countries of the South to come forward with their generous support in the same spirit. Let me conclude, Mr. President, by saying that the South-South and Triangular Cooperation Strategy focused on a number of key thrust areas such as trade, technology, investment, education, and economic cooperation identified in the Doha Program of Action should be materialized. And this should enable the South to play the role of a genuine partner for sustained economic growth, diversification, employment, and poverty reduction in the least developed countries and in the rest of the world. I thank you.
May I thank His Excellency the Ambassador for Nepal for delivering the statement on behalf of the LDCs. May I now have the pleasure of calling on His Excellency the Ambassador from Morocco to deliver the statement on behalf of the lower and middle income countries. The floor is yours, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, Mr. Hakim Steiner, Administrator of UNDP, Madam Dima Al-Khatib, Director of the UN Office for South-South Cooperation. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the like-minded group of countries supporters of middle-income countries. At the outset, I would like to congratulate you, Mr. President, as well as the members of the Bureau for your election to lead this high-level committee. The LMG Mix welcomes the convening of the 21st session of this important committee. Its scope and its role in putting South-South cooperation at the heart of the General Assembly's attention. Excellencies, this year, the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation is convened in an international context marked by multiple and interconnected crises, which have put enormous challenges for developing countries in their pursuit of the 2030 Agenda implementation. Today, more than any time, we need effective international cooperation and genuine global solidarity, which is at the heart of the South-South cooperation. In this regard, the like-minded group of countries supporters of middle-income countries reaffirms its support and commitment to galvanize South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation's role and contribution to the achievement of sustainable development in its economic, social, and environmental dimensions. And we would like to stress the following key messages. First, the group agrees with the recommendations of the Secretary General's report that call for the urgency to rethink how to scale up South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation to build a more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient world for all. We believe that these modalities of cooperation have enormous potential in boosting concrete partnerships in the global South with the aim to enhance developing countries' capabilities for implementing the SDGs. Two, the group would like to emphasize the role of digital technologies in advancing South-South knowledge sharing and promoting technology development through South-South and triangular cooperation. And we stress on the importance to promote access to and transfer of technology in developing countries. In this regard, the group calls for expanding the centers of excellence and initiatives to support developing countries in the acquisition of capacities for research and development to a larger number of middle-income countries. Three, scaling up South-South and triangular cooperation projects and platforms can't be successful without adequate financing, including through regional and multilateral South-led financial institutions, to scale up innovative financing for sustainable development as a complement to official development assistance involving a range of instruments such as grants, concessional financing, debt relief, and loan expansion. Four, as a group of countries facing specific challenges and aware of the multidimensional vulnerabilities facing our development path, mainly due to the middle-income trap, we would like to emphasize the need for improving measures toward accompanying the smooth and irreversible graduation of developing countries. Graduation should not be a punishment or an obstacle for continuing effective international cooperation and support. Five, the group acknowledges the efforts of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation in collaboration with the Development Coordination Office, the Regional Economic Commissions, and other United Nations entities in preparing handbooks on integrating South-South and triangular cooperation for United Nations countries teams and for the United Nations Development System at the regional level. The group appreciates also the collaboration between HLCSSC and the group of friends of voluntary national reviews in promoting and advancing the integration South-South and triangular cooperation perspectives into voluntary national review reports on sustainable development. Sixth, and finally, the LMG mix looks forward to the deliberation of the committee this week and to a substantive evaluation of progress and the actions needed for the implementation of the BAPA Plus 40 outcome documents, as well as to a successful conclusion of the process of adopting the decision of the committee. We look forward to working actively and constructively with you, Mr. President, and members of the Bureau. I thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency, the Permanent Representative of Morocco, for his statement on behalf of the least and middle-income countries. I now give the floor to His Excellency, the distinguished representative of South Africa, on behalf of the African Group. The floor is yours, sir.
Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the African Group. The African Group aligns itself with a statement delivered by Cuba on behalf of the G77 and China, and we would like to add the following remarks. As the world continues to face cascading and interlinked challenges, it is also facing a developmental crisis causing a reversal in progress towards sustainable development. Many African countries are now dealing with the socio-economic impact of the pandemic, the negative effects of climate change, global inflationary pressures, and the challenges linked to food, fuel, and financial markets, as well as the decrease in available resources to finance development. The African Group emphasizes the important role of South-South cooperation as a pivotal vector of international cooperation for enhancing the path towards resilient recovery and sustainable development. Promoting cooperation among the Global South has the potential to yield fruitful results in vital areas such as food insecurity and malnutrition, climate action, digital cooperation, trade, disease control and prevention, to name just a few. It is worth noting that during the global response to the pandemic, developing countries continue to support one another, engaging increasingly on a multilateral basis through South-South and triangular cooperation. In Africa, one of the vivid examples in this regard was the effective health response led by the Africa Center for Disease Control and Prevention. There are also other successful South-South cooperation frameworks amongst African countries on issues such as climate action through a wide range of modalities to tackle mitigation and adaptation, leveraging digital platforms for sharing knowledge and brokering partnerships, intensifying efforts to document good practices in South-South and triangular cooperation, enhancing policy dialogues, and promoting partnerships with centers in Africa to support the development and adoption of harmonized regional energy efficiency standards. The recent crises have resulted in an escalation in food insecurity and malnutrition in the Global South, while commodity and energy exporters gained from rising food and fuel prices. Net importers of agricultural products, especially in Africa, have been particularly vulnerable. African countries can benefit considerably from sharing lessons and experiences in food management and in establishing South-South distribution mechanisms. It is therefore crucial to increase support to South-South cooperation on this matter. In this regard, the African Group notes the efforts of the Food and Agriculture Organization in identifying key regional priorities, including capacity gaps that hinder countries and development partners from actively engaging in South-South and triangular cooperation in the areas of agriculture and food systems. We look forward to promoting similar initiatives in other important sectors. We would like to reiterate, however, that South-South cooperation complements North-South cooperation and is not a substitute for it. Reinforcing and promoting South-South cooperation among developing countries should not in any way reduce the commitment of developed countries to official development assistance. The group looks forward to the discussions that will take place in this high-level committee throughout the coming days, which we hope will present a good opportunity to evaluate progress and recalibrate plans for the implementation of the BAPA Plus 40 outcome document, and to readjust our focus on how to promote South-South cooperation. We look forward to working actively and constructively with you, Mr. President, and members of your Bureau. Now, I would like to read South Africa's national statement. Mr. President, the report of the Secretary General on South-South cooperation reminds us that many developing countries are now dealing with the health and socio-economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, decreased resources for access to vaccines, leading to unequal recovery. The growing inequality within among states threatens the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are essential for the creation of a more inclusive world where no one is left behind. I therefore wish to make the following 3 points. Firstly, on the role of South-South cooperation in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, We reiterate the importance and relevance of the Buenos Aires outcome document, which assesses the evolving intergovernmental landscape, creating conditions conducive to promote South-South cooperation, pursuing sustained economic growth, and building national and collective self-reliance. The SDG Summit to take place in September 2023 takes place at a critical juncture, as we're only left with 7 years to 2030. Our countries are facing multiple challenges that hinder our joint efforts to achieve sustainable development, including eradicating poverty in all its forms and dimensions, reducing inequalities, achieving food security, tackling climate change, promoting industrialization, infrastructure development, and regional integration. South Africa maintains that the international community must work towards achieving the SDGs in an integrated, cooperative, and responsible manner. South Africa contributes meaningfully through the India-Brazil-South Africa Fund in supporting international efforts to eradicate poverty and end hunger in developing countries and the Global South. The IPSA Fund is a world-class facility for poverty and hunger alleviation, which leads the way in addressing the SDGs on issues such as safe drinking water, agriculture and livestock, solar energy, waste management, health, youth development, amongst others. Second, South-South and triangular cooperation played a significant role in addressing COVID-19 and the response and recovery from the socio-economic effects of the pandemic. As stated in the report by the administrator of the UNDP, the measures taken by the government of South Africa, the WHO, and several of our partners in the North and South to produce COVID-19 vaccines and other medications in Africa exemplify the kind of international collective action that should be replicated in addressing other global challenges through South-South and triangular cooperation. Third and last, we will continue to resist any attempt to redefine the role, scope, and principles of South-South cooperation. Hence, our reiteration that North-South cooperation is still the core for development cooperation. South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation are therefore complementary to North-South cooperation and not a substitute thereof. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency the Ambassador Mabongo for that statement he made on behalf of the African group. We do take note of the fact that you play a vital role in the IPSA Fund, which the work of which will be celebrated on the morning of the last day of these sessions to mark the great success IPSA has enjoyed over time. Thank you very much. May I now proceed to give the floor to the distinguished representative of Botswana on behalf of the landlocked countries. The floor is yours.
Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver the message on behalf of the group of landlocked developed countries on the occasion of the 21st session of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation. The group would like to associate with remarks made by Cuba on behalf of the Group of 77 and China. We also congratulate you, Mr. President, and other members of the Bureau for your election to steer the work of the 21st session of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation. Mr. President, like many developing countries, the landlocked developing countries continue to face multifaceted development challenges emanating from the COVID-19 pandemic and other global crises. For our countries in particular, lack of territorial access to the sea and isolation from world markets and high transit costs continue to impose serious constraints reflected in debt levels and reduced capacity to implement the 2030 agenda as well as the Vienna Programme of Action. These common challenges enhance solidarity among the LLDCs, and more than ever, there is more cooperation among the Global South and with the Global North. In this regard, we underline South-South and triangular cooperation as vital to the LLDCs, especially in the areas of productive capacity building, infrastructure, energy, science and technology, trade, investment, and transit transport cooperation. With the support of development partners and transit countries, LLDCs stand a better chance of addressing the economic burden as a result of their landlocked nature. Excellencies, as much as cooperation is encouraging, Much more still needs to be done. For LLDCs, in addition to transport connectivity, a key challenge is limited structural transformation and reliance on natural resource commodities. We therefore call on our partners from the Global South and Global North to extend their cooperation for technology transfer and productive capacity development. This is to enable LDCs capture a high share of value added locally rather than exporting unprocessed goods. Similarly, most LLDCs are net importers. Rising and volatile energy prices are proof that a shift to renewables is paramount for LLDCs to achieve their long-term development goals and develop resilience to external shocks. Excellencies, for the LLDCs, South-South cooperation and indeed triangular cooperation are important for the achievement of the Vienna Program of Action and the Sustainable Development Goals. As we build momentum to accelerate implementation of the Vienna Program of Action and work towards the third United Nations Conference for LLDCs in 2024, we count on your continued support and partnership in this endeavor. We further look forward to raising our voices at upcoming summits such as the Sustainable Development Goals Summit, the Summit of the Future, the Summit on Science and Technology and Innovation, and the Third South Summit. Once again, please accept our sincere gratitude for the opportunity to deliver these remarks on behalf of the group of LLDCs. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Botswana for his statement on behalf of the landlocked countries. May I now proceed to give the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Carolita to deliver the statement on behalf of Timor-Leste. The floor is yours, sir.
Mr. President, Excellencies, and all protocol observed. On behalf of Timor-Leste, I would like to begin by appreciating the leadership of the UNDP Administrator for convening this important meeting. The theme we are addressing today is paramount. The current circumstances that we are facing require the strongest partnership and cooperation among us. The Sustainable Development Report pictured that development progress has been halted as a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic and other global crises. Countries in a special situation like mine are confronted with the structural challenges and obstacles that emerge from multiple crises that the world are facing today. The COVID-19 pandemic, climate crisis, and conflict that are increasing prices on food and energy, raising inequality and poverty are undermine efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Timor-Leste welcomes the report provided by the Secretariat and acknowledges the critical contribution of the South-South and Triangular Cooperation in shaping the World Development Agenda, the South-South and Triangular Cooperation that are based on solidarity, equality, and genuine partnership and commitment to support countries' recovery efforts to achieve the SDGs. We applaud the generous leadership of the countries of the South in building productive capacity, infrastructure, energy, science and technology, trade and investment to support SEEDs and LDCs like Timor-Leste. We are grateful to support SACAST, to name a few, the project on the strengthening social protection policy undertaken by Brazil and the ILO, the project of introducing mobile technology to improve the standard and teaching and learning methods by India, UNDP, and UNICEF in Timor-Leste, as well as the generosity of the government of Cuba for training our young Timorese medical doctors. These are examples that we believe should be extended and scale up in other sectors. The DPOA highlights the relevance and South-South triangular cooperation mechanisms in boosting LDC trade and market integration. Continued mutually beneficial cooperation between LDCs and development partners will enable their full potential and boost economic growth. In this respect, we commend the leadership of the UN system and regional organizations for facilitating and fostering capacity development, technology transfer, and resources mobilization. We also see the importance of looking out for an alternative partnership that goes beyond money, as the aid resources and normal development discourse that focus on connecting South-South through the sharing of experiences, technologies, expertise to help countries in special situations meet the SDGs and DPOA. Timor-Leste confronted vulnerability challenges under G7 Plus platform. We developed a new engagement model of South-South cooperation to strengthen the voice of vulnerability countries by promoting joint advocacy cooperation and lesson learning to promote the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals, with a strong focus on country-led state-building goals and mutual accountability, underpinned by country-led partnership. This statement is associated with the remarks delivered on behalf of the G77 and China and LDC. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency, the Permanent Representative of Timor-Leste, for his statement. May I now proceed to give the floor to His Excellency, the Permanent Representative of Egypt, Ambassador Osama, to make his statement. The floor is yours, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, my dear brother, Ambassador Mohan, Excellencies and distinguished delegates. My delegation aligns itself with the statements delivered by Cuba on behalf of the G77 and China, and by my dear brother, Ambassador Zulisa, representing South Africa on behalf of the African Group, and would like to add the following remarks. Egypt continues to highlight the importance of accelerating and invigorating the concerted efforts among countries of the South to collectively and effectively tackle common challenges. We continue to take action in this regard through the relevant Egyptian entities to engage in and support South-South and triangular cooperation, including through the Egyptian Agency of Partnership for Development and Cairo International Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping, and Peace Building, HLCSSC. The Egyptian Agency of Partnership for Development offers training courses in various fields to trainees from the Global South and provides aid shipments when needed, which included humanitarian assistance, food, medications, and medical equipment. It also continues to dispatch experts in different specializations to numerous developing countries and to offer scholarships to foreign students. The agency also works with counterparts from various African countries to implement joint cooperation programs and exchange experiences, and with the African Union to implement joint programs in different areas, including in capacity building. It also continues to work on promoting engagement in triangular cooperation and collaborating with different development partners to work in Africa, such as Japan and few others. In the field of health, the agency also works on establishing health facilities and surgery centers in African countries, as well as dispatching Egyptian physicians in various medical specializations. It also works on projects to establish electric power plants using solar energy and rehabilitating and operating power plants in a number of African countries, to name but a few. The Cairo International Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping, and Peace Building works as well towards building national, regional, and international capacities through the delivery of specialized training courses, including in peace building and sustaining peace, negotiation and mediation, risk and resilience analysis, and conflict analysis. Most of the programs are sponsored generously by Japan as a very major sponsor of the activities of the Cairo HLCSSC Center. Additionally, it convenes policy dialogues on conflict prevention, peacemaking, and peace building, including by actively contributing to policy debates at the African Union. The center works as well on providing programs to strengthen the capacity of government officials and regional organizations across Africa to assess and respond to climate change and its associated development impacts in a holistic and integrated manner. The Center for Instance, Mr. President, nowadays is the chair of a certain network in Africa for the similar centers operating and availing studies in different related fields. We look forward, Mr. President, to the discussions in the high-level committee throughout the coming days, which is a good opportunity to evaluate progress in South-South cooperation and to look at how best it can be further promoted. This is what I wanted to say in brief, Mr. President. I submit. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency, the Permanent Representative of Egypt, for his statement and that very generous offer of promoting and working for peace, which is such a difficult commodity to find in this day and age. I thank you, Ambassador. May I now give the floor to Her Excellency, the Ambassador for Qatar, Ambassador Alia, to make a statement. The floor is yours, Ambassador.
Mr. Chair, Head of the SSC, we would like to thank you for convening this important meeting, and we align ourselves with the statement of the G7, C7 and China. First of all, we would like to congratulate you and the Bureau, and we are pleased to be honored by serving on the SSC during its 21st session. We spare no effort towards achieving the objectives of this committee, and we applaud the considerable efforts made by the UN Office of SS Cooperation, as well as the activities made towards enhancing cooperation, South-South cooperation. Mr. President, South-South cooperation has long been a very important issue for Qatar. Qatar was the president of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation in 2007. Qatar has been a platform and an edifice to uphold this cooperation, which was translated in tangible steps. In 2005, Qatar hosted the second high-level committee, which emanated into the Doha Plan of Action. And we look forward to the third summit, which will be hosted by Uganda and which will give impetus to South-South cooperation. Mr. President, Qatar is honored by hosting the 5th UN Conference on LLDCs, which was held in Doha in March 2023. That was a pivotal and key event to support the efforts of a number of the Global South and to help the same to build more resilient economy. Qatar has also participated in organizing the ministerial conference on South-South cooperation, which was held during that conference, and it was a very important milestone for coming up with implementable solutions and to give impetus to the Doha Plan of Action, Program of Action. And we also welcome the fact that the Doha Program of Action gave special importance to triangular cooperation and South-South cooperation. Mr. President, we believe that the various challenges faced by South countries makes solidarity between those countries of paramount importance. Thus, we are keen to continue to provide support, and in 2021, Qatar has contributed more than $550 million in development projects as well as humanitarian aid. We also spared no effort to support international efforts to mitigate the repercussions of the COVID-19. Given the innovative patterns that are supported by Qatar, we take this opportunity to highlight what was mentioned in the report, as it hailed the partnership between the UNDP and Qatar for the period between 2022 and 2025, and Qatar pledged $10 million as an additional fund to be provided to the acceleration of the achievement of SDGs in more than 100 countries in the Global South. The total support and aid given by Qatar to the network of labs amounted to $30 million. In conclusion, we are committed to uphold South-South cooperation and to creating real opportunities through this cooperation to support the endeavors of the Global South towards economic recovery and towards the implementation of the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Her Excellency, the Permanent Representative of Qatar, for her statement. And I now give the floor to Her Excellency, the Ambassador for Colombia. The floor is yours, sir.
Gracias. Thank you, Mr. President. Colombia is participating simultaneously in this important high-level committee in the first conference on South-South cooperation organized by ECLA in Santiago, and in the Executive Committee on the Effectiveness of Sustainable Development, and this shows our strong commitment to continue to promote South-South cooperation and sustainable development, which we need so much as a society and as a planet, placing at the center persons and ecosystems. By means of South-South and triangular cooperation, Colombia has multiplied the impact of its efforts to contribute to the solution of current global challenges. The country has been scaling up its offer of projects and programs to share good practices and lessons learned in areas such as peace building, the conservation of biodiversity, disaster risk management, and agricultural development. Additionally, the government of President Gustavo Petro has taken concrete actions to diversify and create new sustainable agendas for South-South and triangular cooperation with the Global South, as shown by the recent trip by the Vice President of the Republic, Francia Marquez, to the African continent. But it's not only a matter of increasing the number of projects and programs of cooperation. It is also essential to improve the efficiency and the impact assessment of each action. That is why in Colombia we foster what we have termed the professionalization of South-South cooperation, which means reducing the number of specific activities and in order to increase the benefits and installed capacities which are the result of their formulation and implementation. To contribute to this process, Colombia has developed a toolkit to identify, formulate, follow up, quantify, and assess the contribution of South-South and triangular cooperation projects. This toolkit is available to developing countries in order to boost their management processes in this type of cooperation. We also propose resuming the initiative of the Statistics Conference of the Americas of ECLA so that the professionals who are responsible for cooperation and national statistics institutes can work together in evaluating the outcomes of South-South and triangular cooperation projects. This type of initiative is relevant and complements the multilateral debate underway on measuring South-South cooperation. In this regard, we emphasize the historic adoption of the conceptual framework to measure South-South cooperation by the United Nations Statistical Commission. And we call on more developing countries to participate in pilot projects leading to the start of their implementation and to identify the capacity building needs together with UNCTAD. Colombia is convinced that implementing this conceptual framework devised under the leadership of the Global South countries will show the fundamental contributions that developing countries make, no matter what their income level is, to the realization of the SDGs. It is also important to say that these are contributions being made in challenging circumstances and in many situations in the absence of concessional resources from traditional partners, despite the well-known multidimensional challenges we face to achieve sustainable development and the existence of unfair criteria which limit our access to practical cooperation solutions. Despite these challenges, in Colombia, we will continue to work to strengthen and highlight the contributions of South-South and triangular cooperation in response to the interconnected crises faced in the world. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Colombia for her statement. We've taken due note of the fact of the professionalization of the South-South Cooperation Initiative and its collaboration with UNCTAD. We wish you every success in all your endeavors. May I now give the floor to the distinguished distinguished representative of Sierra Leone. I believe represented by His Excellency the Ambassador. The floor is yours, sir. Right. I think we probably can take Sierra Leone a little later. May I now turn the floor to His Excellency, to Her Excellency Sophie Eat, the permanent representative of Cambodia. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I start by congratulating you and thanking you for convening this 21st high-level meeting on South-South and triangular cooperation for accelerating the recovery from COVID-19 and the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. My delegation also highly appreciates the report of the UNDP and that of the Secretary General on the progress of the South-South cooperation and the way forward in the implementation of the Nairobi and the Buenos Aires outcome documents of the high-level UN Conference on South-South cooperation. Cambodia would like to associate itself to the statement delivered by Cuba on behalf of the G77 in China. Mr. Chairman, allow me to highlight a few points on the subject of today's discussion. First, as rightly mentioned by you in your opening statement, given the varied development capacity and vast potentials of nations in the South, the South-South cooperation is no doubt very important for addressing the current cascading challenges such as COVID-19 pandemic, food and energy crisis, and climate emergencies. These challenges negatively affect lives of millions of people in the Global South and the achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. By working together, countries in the South can create complementarities or synergies of their know-how, best practices, and resources for mutual benefits and for addressing common challenges. This can be achieved through creating cooperation clusters in areas of shared interest, which may start from neighboring countries, collaboration on products diversification based on their respective comparative advantages, for example, can increase regional cluster productivity and reduce market competition and waste of resources. Second, the synergies and complementarities created through the South-South cooperation will have added values from the financial and technical support from developed countries through triangular cooperation. Third country training programs is an example of a triangular cooperation that Cambodia has long benefited from. The triangular cooperation on sustainable development in the lower Mekong Basin, based on the water, energy, food nexus, as mentioned in the UNDP report, is another example. In terms of FDI, Thailand Plus One business model is an example of external private investor tapping into the different comparative advantages of all regional countries. These are some of the multifaceted approaches to enhance South-South and triangular cooperation. Third, my delegation cannot agree more on the view that South-South cooperation is not a substitute but a complementary to the North-South cooperation. It is absolutely crucial that we continue to promote synergies from these cooperation frameworks to emerge stronger from COVID-19 pandemic, enhance food and energy security, and accelerate our pace toward the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. As many countries in Southeast Asia, where more than 80% of businesses are MSMEs, we would like to emphasize cooperation on digitalization of MSMEs. Finally, Cambodia highly commends the role of the United Nations Office for South-South cooperation in this regard. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the permanent representative of Cambodia for her statement, and we must congratulate you on your Lower Mekong Basin initiative and the Thailand Plus business model that you pursue. And perhaps that's something that the rest of the community can perhaps follow. Thank you very much. Distinguished Excellencies, this morning's list is virtually exhausted for the reason that some of our representatives are not here and have been asked, has requested for different slots. As a result, I was wondering whether there was anyone here who's scheduled for the afternoon who would like to take the floor. If there is anyone, please, yes, I see, I recognize a speaker. Is it Panama? Yes. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Panama. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, heads of delegation, being at this meeting, we're also participating in the first regional conference on South-South cooperation in Santiago, Chile. The delegations of 138 states adopted by consensus a plan of action to promote and implement technical cooperation among developing countries. This is the Buenos Aires Action Plan. Adoption of this plan marked the success of this conference, urging governments and members of the United Nations system to implement their recommendations, betting on a relationship among cooperating parties who benefit and who offer and request benefits and conditions of reciprocity. 40 years later, the second high-level conference of the United Nations takes place on South-South cooperation, PABA plus 40, urging the United Nations development system to help developing countries to build human and institutional capacity that is necessary to formulate and implement national development policy strategies and programs for South-South and triangular cooperation. This conference is part of a global context of cooperation among developing countries in areas such as political, economic, social, cultural, environmental, and technological. This has made it possible for countries to come together horizontally and in conditions of mutual benefit to exchange knowledge and to boost capacities in various areas. In that regard, the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Panama as part of its commitment to the global agenda and the SDGs, has created the Vice Ministry of Multilateral and Cooperation Affairs, which responds to the dynamics of international relations in a global setting in which multilateral bodies have a role to play, fundamental role to play. And when changes in the economic sector ask for a new concept of international cooperation, the Vice Ministry of Multilateral Cooperation Affairs coordinates, integrates, and increases non-reimbursable international cooperation to and from Panama through initiatives, projects, and programs focused on the social agenda, allowing Panama to act as a cooperating country and especially on South-South cooperation. In addition to this, we have launched our National Cooperation Plan, Panama Cooperates, with a vision of state, which posits a new way of understanding international cooperation embodied in the Global Sustainable Development Agenda. This is an unprecedented initiative in the Republic of Panama, and it acts as an instrument for coordination of all the non-reimbursable international cooperation, and all of the actors have a dual role as beneficiaries and authors of international cooperation. The purpose, in addition to bringing dynamics to relations among national and international actors, is optimizing and ensuring the efficient use of resources. We also have a platform of non-reimbursable cooperation, a registry which leads to evaluating and adopting and following up technical cooperation. This is aligned with the Strategic Government Plan and the 2030 Agenda. In September 2015, Panama adopted through an executive decree the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs as part of its National Development Agenda and created a commission. We have shown leadership as a country, promoting actions toward achieving the 2030 Agenda through aligning our efforts with all sectors of society. The Foreign Ministry of the Republic of Panama every year on the 12th of September celebrates the United Nations Day for South-South cooperation. This way of cooperating is an instrument to strengthen capacities among countries, as declared by the United Nations General Assembly. We emphasize that South-South cooperation is an effective tool to implement the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. We support the formulation of public policies by countries, offering opportunities to citizens and reactivating the sectors which have been impacted the most from the pandemic. Panama has been boosting South-South cooperation projects bilaterally and multilaterally. We have been supporting various sectors: agriculture, social, education, institutional strengthening, and disaster risk management, among others. The United Nations has been supporting our countries in our aligning of the National Strategic Plan with the priority actions to promote on the 2030 Agenda and achieve the 17 SDGs. The national government continues to work together with various sectors of civil society, private sector, local governments, international bodies, and academia to move forward through shared visions. In this regard, the Government of Panama and the UN system in February 2021 signed the Framework of Cooperation for Sustainable Development for the period 2021 to 25, the purpose of which is to reduce social, economic, and territorial inequalities so that everyone, especially the most vulnerable, may have a worthy life without violence. This instrument has 4 areas of work: equality, governance, climate change, and the prevention of violence and protection of human rights. The expected results are interrelated and commonly strengthen one another to bring about structural changes which will have a positive impact in the life of everyone in Panama. The definition of these 4 areas of work are the result of a participatory process organized by the UN system with the cooperation of the Foreign Ministry. Through this framework of cooperation for sustainable development, the United Nations, through its various agencies and funds and programs, support our government to move forward on the SDGs and not lose any of the process made in facing the challenges of COVID-19. Our Vice Ministry of Multilateral and Cooperation Affairs has been working closely with the United Nations Office on South-South cooperation. For this reason, I wish to emphasize the support given by the UN Office on South-South cooperation through training sessions and support in promoting the Our Oceans Conference, which was hosted by Panama, and the various days during the National Days of Cooperation, and of course through the South-South Galaxy platform. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Panama for her statement, and I note with great glee that you make use of the framework of cooperation which the South-South Initiative offers in meeting the challenges of your country. Distinguished delegates, I see the floor has been requested by the distinguished representative of Azerbaijan. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Congratulations with your election. Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to address the 21st session of High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation. We applaud the organization of this important gathering aimed at reviewing progress made in implementing the Buenos Aires Plan of Action and the new direction strategy for South-South cooperation, among other important documents. I express our profound thanks to the organizers, particularly to the dedicated team of the United Nations Office of South-South Cooperation. The format and program of the event enable us to address a wide range of issues pertaining to international development, in particular South-South and triangular cooperation. Today's session is a good opportunity to assess the post-pandemic realities and efficiency of global partnership to this end. The South-South cooperation is an expression of South-South solidarity that had proven its relevance by considerable achievements. It's a dynamic phenomenon and an important process that's vital to confront the challenge faced by the least developed and developing countries in a wide geography constituting among almost two-thirds of the world countries and more than 80% of the world's population. The rapid economic growth of some major developing countries has indeed dramatically improved the development prospects of neighboring countries, spurring economic growth and South-South trade and investment. Today, those countries have accumulated varying degrees of capacities and experiences in development that can be shared on a South-South basis. In this regard, global partnership, as agreed in Goal 17, would be crucial for meeting the challenge of economically disadvantaged nations. Azerbaijan, as a reliable and responsible member of the international community, remains committed to assist and promote the international development agenda, as well as to address better the development challenge globally. From the early years of independence, our country was faced with foreign aggression and illegal occupation of its sovereign territories. The conflict took tens of thousands of human lives and displaced around 1 million Azerbaijanis. This caused devastating effects on our social and economic situation. As a result of successful domestic and foreign policy, sustainable progress and dynamic economic development, the Republic of Azerbaijan managed to overcome the imposed impediments and successfully transform into a donor country. In a spirit of solidarity with the countries facing humanitarian and economic difficulties, as well as being closely involved in the global development process, our country realized its international donor mission. Between 2018 and 2022, through the governmental scholarship programs for the OIC and non-aligned movement countries, Azerbaijan provided full higher education scholarships to the students from 83 countries. In the same period, diplomats from 47 states have successfully completed the Advanced Foreign Service program organized by Azerbaijan International Development Agency in partnership with the ADA University in Baku. In the last 10 years, with contribution of Azerbaijan, over 300,000 people undertook eye examinations. Nearly 60,000 patients who had partially or fully lost their eyesight regained their vision as a result of cataract surgeries free of charge within the Alliance to Fight Avoidable Blindness campaign in 13 African states. The international aid provided by Azerbaijan, including development assistance, has already reached more than 130 countries, and our ODA reached its peak this year. In first 4 months of 2023, our international assistance approximated 148 million of US dollars. Azerbaijan successfully continues to carry out its chairmanship duties in the non-aligned movement, predominantly composed of the Global South countries. In this capacity, we do support the essential role of South-South cooperation in the provision of collaborative frameworks, cross-border and inter-regional programs, as well as standards, regulatory arrangements, and implementation mechanisms. The donorship activity of Azerbaijan reached its peak during the COVID-19 pandemic, coinciding with its chairmanship in the non-aligned movement. Since the beginning of the pandemic, Azerbaijan was among the first countries actively engaged in mobilizing national and global efforts to address the pandemic and its negative consequences. We successfully supported the global fight against pandemics through a number of important undertakings, including in its capacity of the chair of NAM, Azerbaijan proposed a resolution on ensuring equal, affordable, timely, and universal access to vaccines against COVID-19, which was adopted by the UN General Assembly in December 2021. To support their fight against the coronavirus, my country has provided financial and humanitarian assistance to more than 80 countries, directly or through World Health Organization. We also offered around 1 million doses of vaccines to 14 countries from the Global South. Our solidarity and close cooperation to this end bear a special importance in post-COVID period, which was addressed by the summit of the Non-Aligned Movement Contact Group in response to COVID-19, successfully held in Baku on 2nd March 2023. At the said summit, the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, His Excellency Ilham Aliyev, declared 2 global calls, namely to support the post-pandemic recovery of Africa and small island developing states. The President announced that Azerbaijan, as the first donor, is allocated $1 million for each global call. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate that as an emerging donor country, Azerbaijan is strongly committed to developing its international aid policy and activities, including through the South-South and triangular cooperation. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Azerbaijan for his statement, it's noteworthy that as an emerging donor country that you are making a significant contribution, inclusive of your program to eliminate blindness in the African continent, which I thought was a laudable initiative. Thank you, Ambassador. May I now give the floor to His Excellency, the Ambassador from the Russian Federation, Dmitry Shurmakov. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Russian Federation considers South-South cooperation to be an important format for mutual support between the countries of the Global South. It is complementary but does not replace traditional forms of development assistance. We note that in the light of the serious challenges facing developing countries, as well as the inability of developed countries to fulfill their obligations in terms of development financing, the importance of South-South cooperation is growing. The reports of the Secretary General of the United Nations and the UNDP administrator submitted to this session show that developing countries are already finding solutions to development issues together. These issues include combating poverty and inequality, increasing the quality of healthcare and education, strengthening the production potential and modernization of state governance. We also welcome the inclusion of South-South cooperation in the strategic and programming documents of the UN Development System organizations. We expect that the provisions on South-South cooperation in the upcoming quadrennial comprehensive policy review of operational activities will be strengthened. We welcome the completion of the conceptual framework for the measurement of South-South cooperation. The Russian Federation participated in this work as an observer. At the same time, we note that any initiatives to quantitatively measure South-South cooperation must be voluntary in nature. And this because we must take into account the many types of South-South cooperation, and they must not be used to reconsider the financial obligations of developed countries. According to the latest data, in 2021, the volume of assistance provided by the Russian Federation to developing countries reached $1.2 billion. A large portion was allocated through trilateral cooperation. Such programs are carried out jointly with UNDP, UNIDO, the FAO, the WFP, and other UN system agencies. The increase in mutually beneficial and equal partnerships between the countries of the South is also facilitated by regional links in such formats as BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the Eurasian Economic Union. In our joint projects with these bodies, the Russian experts have supported our partner countries in carrying out various reforms. Thus, over the past years, Russian specialists have assisted in the reforms of the forestry sector in Armenia, in increasing trade opportunities for Belarus and Uzbekistan, in developing a digital vaccine register in Turkmenistan, in increasing the national potential for climate modeling in Kyrgyzstan, in the development of startup ecosystems in Tajikistan, in the modernization of governance of state work in or city work in Cuba. We've also financed a UNIDO project on modernizing Cuban industry, which provides for both agricultural technology and fertilizer. And this was included in the manual for best practices in the area of South-South cooperation and trilateral cooperation. And this was in 2022. We plan to continue to provide support in bolstering the potential of developing countries, including through bilateral channels, first and foremost by providing access to quality education. Beginning this year, the government of the Russian Federation has increased the quota of free education for foreign citizens to 30,000 persons per year. Such students are studying in the most important specialities for economically developing countries, including engineers, in medicine, in energy, and in agriculture. Mr. President, we expect that the UN system will continue to assist in creating the necessary conditions for South-South cooperation and trilateral cooperation. Over the past 10 years, this format has allowed for the improvement of living conditions for all developing countries, which is a significant indicator of its role in the context of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency the Ambassador of the Russian Federation for his statement, and we might congratulate you for your initiatives in multilateral, trilateral, and South-South cooperation initiatives, which includes the field of education, health, and so on and so forth. Thank you. May I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, President. At the outset, I wish to congratulate you and the members of the Bureau on your election to the presidency, and I wish you every success in your work. I thank the Ambassador of Argentina for her leadership during the previous session. I also wish to congratulate Ms. Dima Al-Khatib, who has newly assumed her role, and I wish her every success. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon. At the outset, I would like to thank the United Nations who have organized this meeting of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation. This allows us to act together and to launch initiatives to ramp up sustainable development in those countries who have the most need. This is also an opportunity to benefit from the experiences of various developing countries and to promote the Addis Ababa Plan of Action and South-South cooperation. The world knows many economic, social challenges that are unprecedented, all because of COVID-19. We must draw lessons from this. We must also implement the best practices to fully overcome these shocks and challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, we began to offer our assistance in the 1970s, aware of the principles of solidarity. My country has played a leading role in the Buenos Aires Plan of Action of 1978. We encourage countries to bolster cooperation between developing countries as a strategy to overcome development issues and to better understand each other and learn from each other. We support the 2030 Agenda, and we have aligned our national vision with it. We have bolstered our principles of South-South cooperation because mutual cooperation and solidarity, as well as the exchange of expertise, is the foundation for our common goals. We know that the countries of the South are working to promote their own development, and my country, over the past 60 years, has offered humanitarian assistance and development assistance to Africa, South Asia, and Latin America. And this was approximately $36 billion of assistance. This included 74 countries and over 2,400 projects in education, food security, energy, healthcare, and so on. According to the OECD in 2021, my country was first on the list of foreign development assistance when it comes to the portion of its GDP. We were also in 6th place when it comes to net foreign development assistance. South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation are more important than ever. This is why the Saudi Development Fund shares its experiences and is expanding its scope of activity. We have launched activities to build capacity, to exchange experience, technical expertise, and research with the countries of the South. We have also expanded the scope of our convention with the group of the Islamic Bank for Development. We are also cooperating with the African mechanism, the ABRM, to bolster cooperation and exchange expertise. This works in several domains, including digital governance, digitalization, and other areas. In conclusion, we will continue our cooperation with international authorities for South-South cooperation and sustainable development. We will work with all stakeholders, international partners, and so on to bolster development and to promote the interests of humanity as a whole. We will continue this cooperation at the regional and international level to achieve the Agenda 2030 and to achieve the 17 goals. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia for his statement. I think what was noteworthy perhaps of all was that he would treat generously humanity as a whole. I thought that was a sterling value, quite apart from the fact that you've been generous with Africa, South Asia, the Latin American states in providing development assistance and capacity building, and particularly through your Islamic banking, Bank for Development initiatives globally. We thank you for your contribution to the development of many of the countries South-South. Thank you, Ambassador. May I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka, Ambassador Gunaratna, to make his statement. The floor is yours, sir.
Aligns itself with the statement delivered by the Group of 77 in China and wishes to make the following remarks in our national capacity. We note the reports of the Secretary General and the Administrator of the UNDP. Both reports provide an overview of the state of South-South and triangular cooperation and review the progress made in implementation of technical cooperation programs under BAPA Plus 40, the new direction strategy for South-South cooperation, and the outcome documents of the Nairobi and Buenos Aires summits. While the polycrisis confronting the world today has been an inhibiting factor for progress in South-South and triangular cooperation on achieving the SDGs, it is precisely at a time of such crisis that we need to strengthen cooperation in both areas as we look forward to building back from the setbacks we have faced. Sri Lanka reiterates the necessity to upscale South-South cooperation initiatives to accelerate the recovery from the impact of COVID-19 pandemic and the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, as well as to confront the challenges emanating from the prevailing international security environment, the rising debt levels, energy and food crisis, as well as climate change. The UNDP Administrator's report correctly emphasizes the need to invest more in healthcare, education for all, digitalization, sustainable technologies, humanitarian assistance, governance, monetary and financial systems, and the boosting of productive capacities and carbon neutrality. Mr. Chairman, it is accepted across the board that the pre-existing vulnerabilities of the developing world were exacerbated during the past several years of the pandemic, and the breakdown of global supply chains followed by the deteriorated security situation. The impact of these world events was dire on Sri Lanka's economy and its people, as it has proved to be on many countries of the global south. The new directions identified in 1995, with high priority areas of trade and investment, debt, environment, poverty alleviation, macroeconomic policy coordination, remain on the top of the agenda for the countries of the global south in varying degrees. Sustained concern among these is the need to address financing the development needs of the global south, achieving financial inclusion, implementation of digital public goods in the financial sector, and fostering development partnerships that are outcome-oriented and financially sustainable. The innovation of the countries of the global south during the past decades, since the inception of the idea of South-South cooperation, has been one of tremendous value. Technology flows between our countries have proved vital lifelines in development. As the global south becomes an increasingly important driver of the world's economy, South-South and intra-regional trade becomes more central to the development discourse and is a concrete indication of the potential of the global south. In the present landscape, it is important not only to revisit those structures that inhibit the growth of the south, but also ensure that there is no rollback of the gains due to the events of the past several years. Therefore, while recognizing the vital role of ODA commitments, the continued North-South cooperation, and the modality of triangular cooperation to enhance delivery, perhaps it is time to return to the first principles for the creation of this platform. These principles may be the basis on which to review the progress made in promoting South-South cooperation, in finding solutions to common issues, and the integration of South-South cooperation policies into the development work of the UN and its organs. The importance of common vision of development and cooperation by the global south has never been more evident to combat the impact of the present multiple crises and expanding inequalities. However, while working towards this common vision, we must be mindful of repeating familiar patterns of a world order, replacing one with another. Our aim should not be to repeat the actions that have brought global governance to the present state of crisis. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I must state that Sri Lanka has enjoyed the support and partnership of both the global south and the north as it cautiously takes its initial first steps in economic recovery. and remains committed to the direction and framework for collaboration as identified by the BAPA Plus 40 outcome document as adopted in 2019. It is our hope that the forthcoming SDG Summit, the third South Summit, the Summit on Science, Technology and Innovation, and the Summit of the Future will provide the overall framework and guidance in fostering South-South and North-South partnerships that will provide the necessary stimulus for putting the SDG agenda back on track. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka for his statement, and I think there are some takeaways in that, and that is that we must be ready to exploit the crisis. He also told us that that we cannot afford to roll back all the gains by what has actually happened in contemporary times, and that we need to guard against that. And I'm happy to note that Sri Lanka, as I personally know for myself, is turning a corner with the cooperation that is afforded to it through South-South cooperation and from the North. Thank you. May I now give the floor to His Excellency, the distinguished representative of Pakistan. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Pakistan aligns its statement with the statement delivered by Cuba on behalf of G77 and China. Allow me to congratulate you, Mr. Chairman, and other Bureau members on being elected to the Bureau of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation, and particularly the excellent stewardship of today's proceedings by you, Mr. Chairman. I also felicitate Madam Dima Al-Khattab on her appointment as Director of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation. Pakistan reiterates its strong support to the mandate of the UNOSCC, which is the driver of South-South cooperation in United Nations system. We express appreciation for the STEAM office for effectively carrying out its high-level committee's secretarial functions, for being a responsive partner, and for its achievements during the previous framework 2018 to 2021. Mr. Chairman, South-South cooperation is not a substitute for, but rather a complement to North-South cooperation, and the developed countries must fulfill their commitments for North-South cooperation. To fully harness the potential of South, there is a need to augment the means of implementation of the 2030 Agenda. In this regard, development partners must fulfill their official development assistance commitments. At the same time, we acknowledge the need to enhance the development effectiveness of South-South and triangular cooperation. In this context, the role of UNOSCC Strategic Framework 2022 to 2025 is vital. It is encouraging to note that the program incorporates the principles and objectives set by member states in the Buenos Aires Plan of Action, the Nairobi Outcome Document, the BAPA 40 document, as well as the relevant GA resolutions. Recent decades have seen an increase in South-South cooperation in trade, technology transfer, development finance, and in approaches to global climate change. The share of South-South trade in global trade increased to 28% during 2021, and by mid-2022, the trade among the South countries rose by 50% as compared to 2019. Likewise, in 2021, the FDI flows to developing countries increased by 30% to US $837 billion, a manifestation of strong growth performance of the developing countries despite multiple challenges. In addition, last year, through the concerted efforts of Pakistan and the G77 and China, the Loss and Damage Fund was established at the COP27 held at Sharm el-Sheikh. We are hopeful that the South-South partners will continue to promote collaboration based on equal footing, mutual benefits, and win-win outcomes. The South-South cooperation can have a robust impact in multiple domains, including but not limited to trade, infrastructure, connectivity, human capital, education, health, agriculture, science and technology, climate resilience, and disaster risk reduction, among others. Pakistan stands fully committed to replicate the successful templates of the South and share lessons which we learned in the context of disaster risk reduction and climate resilience, particularly in the wake of 2022 climate-induced floods. the Resilient Recovery, Rehabilitation, and Reconstruction Framework, 4RF, presents a comprehensive strategy to ensure resilient recovery and to reduce the impact of the climate catastrophe and disasters on developmental gains. Mr. Chairman, there is a need to further tap into enormous potential of the South-South and triangular cooperation aimed at ensuring that no one is left behind. The following measures are recommended in this regard. First, Pakistan encourages member states to contribute more generously to the work of UNOSSC through the United Nations Fund for South-South Cooperation and Perez Guerrero Trust Fund for South-South Cooperation in accordance with various General Assembly resolutions on the subject. Second, under the auspices of UN Office for South-South Cooperation, develop a mechanism to measure the impact of South-South cooperation to collect empirical data. It will help to mobilize resources for achieving the 2030 agenda. Third, it is important the United Nations South system further mainstream the South-South and triangular cooperation in its policies, work, and support schemes. Fourth, to ensure the rapid expansion of South-South cooperation, create interregional and global frameworks to provide a platform for sharing best practices. 5, to leverage South-South cooperation with stress to strengthen knowledge sharing to promote e-commerce and digitization of agriculture and rural economies. 6, to maintain robust South-South and triangular cooperation in the international development agenda, besides providing funds, enhance other means of implementation, such as trade, investment, and tax reforms. 7, to seize the benefits of the fourth industrial revolution, access to technology is essential. South-South cooperation can play a pivotal role in the transfer of technology among the countries of the South and thus aid their economic empowerment and development processes. Finally, Mr. Chairman, to achieve sustainable development, the cardinal focus of the triangular support should be the capacity development of the South. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of Pakistan for his statement, and we have noted with particular importance the fact that you emphasized that the development partners must continue to promote and to contribute and keep by their development obligations towards the South. The development trajectory of that we must continue to strongly support the development trajectory of the South, and the resilience and the experience that you have shown in dealing with disasters, that you are willing to share those experiences with the rest of the world. I thank you for that statement. Thank you. I also recognize the fact that the distinguished representative of Indonesia wishes to speak. May I give you the floor, sir? Thank you.
Thank you very much, President. I thank you and also the UNDP administrator for convening today's high-level committee on South-South cooperation. The meeting highlights the increasing importance of the South-South and Triangular Cooperation, or SSTC, particularly when the majority of the global South are still recovering from the impacts of the pandemic while striving to rescue the SDGs that is seriously off track. While it is important to underline that South-South cooperation is complementary to the North-South cooperation, the benefits of South-South cooperation cannot be overstated, as South-South cooperation is one based on solidarity and empowerment to address common challenges of developing countries. For Indonesia, the SSTC remains the center of our international development policy. The establishment of Indonesian Aid in 2019 is evidence to Indonesia's unwavering commitment to promote South-South and triangular cooperation. Throughout the years, we have initiated more than 1,000 programs, reaching more than 13,000 beneficiaries in Africa, Asia, the Pacific, and Caribbean. We strongly believe that there are more potentials for South-South cooperation to be untapped. Against this backdrop, allow me to highlight 2 points. First, enabling sustainable growth must be the focus of South-South cooperation. This is key if we want to turbocharge the SDGs implementation. An important part of this is our ability to generate and mobilize what we call new sources of growth. Cooperation in such areas as digital transformation, green and blue economy, micro, small, and medium enterprises, sustainable infrastructure, and financial inclusion are key. And these must be anchored in the empowerment of women and youth. These areas of cooperation need to be scaled up to achieve inclusive and sustainable development for developing countries. Second, we need to stimulate multi-stakeholder partnerships, including private sector engagement. Multi-stakeholder partnership allows more opportunity to further expand and strengthen the cooperation in the form of investment, financing, capacity building, and transfer of technology. Advancing inclusive partnership that benefits the Global South has always characterized Indonesia's international development policy. Among others, we did this during our chairmanship in IORA, our G20 presidency last year, our current ASEAN chairmanship, and also the forthcoming summit of the Archipelagic and Island States Forum. The spirit also guides Indonesia in hosting the Non-Aligned Movement Center for South-South and Triangular Cooperation. The UN-wide system can play a catalytic role in this context to promote partnership and resource mobilization. Finally, Chair, Indonesia stands ready to work with all member states and international partners to achieve inclusive and sustainable development agenda through South-South cooperation. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished ambassador from Indonesia for his statement. It is noteworthy that you have engaged in more than 1,000 programs in Asia, in Africa, that you have pushed the sustainable growth trajectory to the SDGs. You have emphasized on digitalization, the blue economy, and finally that you believe that the stakeholders must be widened, inclusive of the inclusion of the private sector. And these are matters that we can all probably emulate in these processes that we engage in the name of South-South cooperation. Now, Excellencies, is there anyone else who would probably wish to take the floor? If so, please press the button. Right. I see no buttons pressed. And may I be permitted to stimulate the early hours of the afternoon by just throwing up something for the appetite of all of us who probably are waiting for a light lunch. Perhaps I can direct this question in your behalf to the director herself. After all, who's better to answer questions than ask the chief actor as to what it's all about? It just occurred to me, Director, that in general, any organization, exactly like South-South Cooperation, can always strive to do more by expanding its reach. And we heard that this morning. Increasing its impact, improving its efficiency. We've heard all about it this morning. Now, this may involve seeking out, as we heard from Indonesia last, new partnerships, develop new programs of initiatives, invest in technology and infrastructure to better to see its stakeholders. And ultimately, I would say it appears that the success of South-South cooperation depends on its ability to adapt, to innovate, to evolve over time, to meet the changing needs and challenges of its environment. We have come a long way from BAPA 40. We are now in a new environment. So my question to you, Director, what more do you see could we do to take this to a different paradigm? Thank you.
Thank you very much, President. Allow me first to thank all the excellencies in the room who have acknowledged the role of the UN Office for South-South Cooperation in support of the different initiatives that were mentioned by the different countries, and that we continue to be committed to that. Thank you very much for that stimulating question, which can take whole day to further discuss and unpack, but let me put forward few key elements. One, and that has been mentioned by several representatives here in the room, there is definitely a need to enhance the sharing of experiences, those solutions that are coming from the South that needs to be further enhanced, especially after the pandemic. And this is something that we can definitely try to exert more effort in. And the intention of the UN Office for South-South Cooperation is to establish what we call the Solutions Lab, South-South Cooperation Solutions Lab, which we are in the process of designing, and there will be a consultative process in setting up that mechanism, which will be handy in terms of really capitalizing also on the existing platforms that we have, such as the Galaxy. The other aspect that I want to mention, and it has been mentioned by several also representatives here, is the importance of the measurement of the impact of South-South. This will enable the countries of the South to really better get a sense of, the impact of South-South, but it was also a pointer and an indicator for the countries of the North and for other bilateral actors, such as also the UN entities, to enhance this triangular cooperation part. So I think this is going to be a stepping stone, and the efforts that are being conducted are extremely important. The co-custodianship by UNCTAD is definitely something to commend. The third element, and it was also mentioned by several representatives in the room, is the importance of capacity building. And this is really extremely important, because the sharing of knowledge is not only in terms of, what is the solution, but is how to do it and how you ensure the sustainability of it. The last element that I want to mention, and this is also in line with the recommendations of the UN Secretary General report, is the importance of the work at the countries level. And the work that we are doing currently to anchor South-South and triangular cooperation within the UN Cooperation Development Framework is extremely important, because they are the direct interlocutors with the national partners. So these are the key elements that I wanted to mention, and definitely for every one of them, the expansion is definitely an option, and we should look into it, and we look forward to collaborating with you and with your bureau in setting an action plan towards also enhancing the policy dialogue and, ensuring the voices of the countries of the South are heard at the highest levels. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Director, for those observations that were very useful. Is there any member or delegate in the floor who would like to respond or make some observation or make a comment on what the Director was pleased to tell us? Right. I see none. So may I be permitted to proceed, merely to inform you, distinguished delegates, that we have got we've got the tail end of the proceedings of the morning. We shall reconvene in this room at 3 p.m. and continue the general debate. I would thank you to be punctual. May I just one final announcement before I let you go for lunch. I'm pleased to inform you, as I did comment in the morning, that the Bureau members and I have accepted the request by the Secretariat to stage an event by India, Brazil, and South Africa, the South Africa Trust Fund. The Trust Fund, as you know, is an important example amongst other trust funds of interregional cooperation. The event will take place here on Friday, the 2nd of June at 1500 hours, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, before our closing. Right. I can now probably let you go for lunch and revitalize yourselves. Thank you very much for being with us this morning and making this a lively debate. The meeting is adjourned.